Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by NextGen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Good afternoon and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. Today with me is Leah Lizarondo. She is the CEO and founder of Food Rescue Hero. I'm so pleased to have you here, Leah. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Justine.
I'm so excited to get to chat with you and to learn a little bit more about Food Rescue Hero, and for our guests and our listeners to learn a little bit more about it. So just if you wouldn't mind, for those listeners and viewers that are not familiar with Food Rescue Hero, if you could just start us off with like your 30-second pitch or whatever, you have, so that we could catch them up before we get chatting.
Yes.
And we're all on a level playing field.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. The best way to describe it is we are the DoorDash of food surplus. And what we basically do is we take surplus food from grocery stores, restaurants, and we deliver them to charities. And the food is delivered, coordinated by an app, just like these commercial services, by volunteers. So that's why Food Rescue Heroes. So our drivers are all volunteers moving surplus food from where it's coming from to a nonprofit or charity that can use it to feed people who are hungry.
Wow, I like that. And I like the way that you explained it and compared it to DoorDash. Makes it very simple and easy to understand.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to come up with this?
Yeah, so truly what inspired it was a report that I read in 2012 by the Natural Resources Defense Council, which was titled Wasted. And it was in that report where I first read that 40% of all the food we produce goes to waste. And that was a really shocking number to me, because I think all of us know that food waste happens, but I didn't realize it was up to almost half our food supply.
Right.
And so in looking at that problem and seeing where the food surplus was coming from, realizing that there is a new transport network and technology that can help us move food very cheaply and even free from one location to the other. That was what really kind of ignited that possibility. So seeing the DoorDashes of the world, the Uber Eats grow, it was taking that model and then translating it to surplus food.
Yeah, and I think that there are other companies out there that do this, but I haven't seen them do it in this way.
Yes. Exactly. There are so many organizations that, from the little church in the corner that takes the food from the bakery at the end of the day so that they can, distribute it to people in need, to, even some larger organizations. But none of them really use an app to coordinate its drivers. And so that way it can scale its operations in the way that these commercial food delivery services has. And so that's what we did. And Food Rescue Hero operates in about 25 cities in the US and Canada, with about 40,000 registered drivers.
Okay, so you read this paper, this report in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
In 2012, what were you doing?
What was I doing? Oh, actually, I was a food writer at that time.
Oh, you were a food writer. You were a food writer.
Mm-hmm.
Is this your first entrepreneurial stint?
It is actually. Yes, it is. And it combines, I also have a background in technology. I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon. And of course, I love food, being a food writer. And so it's really combining those two things.
So you mentioned you went to Carnegie Mellon. I think of Carnegie Mellon, I think of somebody that is in engineering. Are you an engineer?
No, I am not an engineer. I'm a technology policy person. So that's what I went to grad school for. So I love technology. I understand it, but I cannot write code.
You didn't develop the app yourself.
No. So the design was, as part of the team that designed it, and we have a team of engineers that are ably, creating it and maintaining it.
Okay, but this was your first stint. So you went from being, but you had this background in policy and in food and in technology, and you took all that background and that information and education, and after reading this report and decided to create this business from what you saw was a really big need, and you figured out because of your background how to create it in an app, right?
Yes. Yeah, I was lucky enough, that, life has led me so far to kind of this culmination.
Okay, so now you have this startup, which is, takes a whole new skill set to do, right? Like to be able to, you came up with the vision, and now you have to build this business, and you did it on your own because you're the founder. You didn't bring a co-founder in.
So 412, it all started also with a smaller nonprofit here that's based in Pittsburgh, which is called 412 Food Rescue. And for that, there was a whole team of people, and even with Food Rescue Hero, I might be kind of the figurehead and kind of the face for it and the spokesperson, but there's a whole big team around me. We are a team of almost 40 people, and have a team of leaders that are doing this with me.
So my question though is, you went from this idea, this ideation, to the 40 people. So,
yeah.
Can you walk me through that? Because we have a lot of founders that listen to these stories for inspiration, and it can be daunting and it can be scary, and you come to these ideas with no experience, no funding, and you're like, how do I go from A to Z? And 40 people is a lot. And you've shown great success. You've grown nationally and globally because you're in Canada. I mean, it's US adjacent, right? But it's globally. It's
US adjacent. I'm sure they appreciate that.
You need a passport to get there, right?
Right.
There's a lot of success in this, and you went from being a food writer to doing this. So to me, this is a great story that I think our listeners and our viewers would really get a lot out of hearing how you went from that to that. So walk us through it a little bit. Tell us how you had this idea, and did you surround yourself with mentors? Did you, and advisors? And at what point did you realize this really was a great idea? And now did you need to raise money? Were you self and funded? I've got a zillion questions for you.
Yeah. So I didn't actually, so my most immediate experience prior to this was food writing, but leading up to even that, I've had a career of, I would say, to use the word adjacent as well, adjacent entrepreneurship. So I started my career out at one of the Fortune 500 consumer goods companies. I was a brand manager, which means, I was responsible for the profit and loss of certain brands. And at that point, I would say that was my first CEO gig, right? Because, I would control or, be responsible for everything from, manufacturing to research and development to advertising, and making sure that, the brand was as profitable as it could get. Margins were also something that we constantly watched. So, and then after that, I worked in consulting, where I worked with a lot of technology startups. Again, doing much of their marketing strategy, launch strategy. So worked with a lot of entrepreneurs on their business plans. So the training was there to actually start.
I'm getting the feeling you had a lot, all these different roles that you played led you and gave you the experience and the insight and the groundwork to be able to do your job when you got there.
Absolutely. I don't think I would have been able to do this without that past experience, for sure. And so it's really taking all of that and, kind of having a good understanding of what is needed to start this. And, mentioned funding as one of the key factors, of course. And I think the biggest learning curve for me was exactly that. I have not raised money for an endeavor that I have. But at the same time, because we believed so much in the idea, and to your point, we really kind of knew it was going to succeed. It was not very hard to invite others to invest in it.
Yeah, well, what a great, I mean, it's so interesting to hear people's journeys and your journey, because of course, you're like, oh, I'm a food writer, then I did this. I'm like, okay, let's talk about the in between.
Right, right,
Right?
right.
Because,
Yes.
it's what I hear so often is, we hear the story of Oatly and people are like, oh, it was like an overnight success. And I'm like, okay, let's wait, let's stand back a minute. That was not an overnight
Yeah.
success,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They were around for years. Finally, they got to do the barista thing. And once they got into to do the barista thing, it felt like an overnight success,
Right.
because all of a sudden there was people were using it everywhere, and it became a household name because there was
Mhm.
oat milk there, and it was there, right?
Right.
There was many years that they were working, and they were popular in other countries. And so that's why it's so important and so interesting to me to hear how you got there
Yes.
and
Yeah.
what goes into it.
Right. It's certainly not, we always hear of these successes and we think they started yesterday, right? But there's
Right.
many, many years we didn't hear about them. So for us, it was, leading up to this, again, knowing the work that I've done with other tech entrepreneurs and, working at in consumer goods, um, kind of having a good understanding of what a profit and loss statement looks like, what goes into technology production, what is marketing, how do we get all of, so, getting all of the, to your show, ingredients together, including the marketing and, kind of the software engineering, putting costs associated with that, and then targeting which investors and funders would be interested in supporting something like this. So it's I think what I hear a lot from entrepreneurs is you do have a directional idea, but the actual, kind of making it happen, a lot of it is taking it one day at a time and seeing where one step leads next. And with a lot of startups, because you're bootstrapping, what needs attention first. And I think the best entrepreneurs that I admire are those entrepreneurs that can recognize how to triage that with very little money in place. And that's what I tried to learn from.
So I'm curious, one thing that I get a lot of questions about is about pitching. It's scary. It's scary to go pitch. It's when people use the word pitch, as opposed to, having conversations and coffee and, meeting up with somebody and just talking about their idea. But when they're talking about quote unquote pitching and presenting and creating these formal decks, it's a very different thing, right? So it's all in the narrative and the way that they're presenting it and talking about it. So I'd love to hear from you on your thoughts on that.
So when I was starting, it was just, I felt the same way that, I would get nervous. I would, go up there, I needed to get it right. And I'm trying to get something from people. And I think the key thing there that changed for me was a couple of things, actually. The first is, you were saying narrative. This is not, when you do a pitch, it's not about hitting the points you think they want to hear. It's you understanding what your narrative is. Why do you believe in it? And if you can create a narrative that you yourself are convinced about and you believe fully in it, then it becomes less of trying to convince someone else, but really just communicating why you believe in it. And then second thing that changed for me was, this is not an asymmetrical relationship when we are trying to have a conversation with funders. I think, again, that word is important. Instead of a pitch where you're trying to tell someone something, if you look at it as a conversation, then the whole thing changes, because funders want to give money. That's their whole goal, is where do I give my money? And then your goal is basically, I have this product, this service that is so great that you giving money to it is actually a benefit to you.
Exactly. It has to be mutual.
Exactly. And I think
that it has
right.
to be mutual. It's not just, oh, I have to win them over. It's that this has to be mutually beneficial. not only is this a great thing that I'm building and I'm super smart and this idea is great but I want the right partnership. I want the right
Mm,
financial and human capital that I can
mhm.
partner with so we can
Yeah,
build this together. And I think
exactly.
that's where people fall short sometimes. And changing that narrative in your head, I think, can change the way you communicate and change the whole conversation.
Yes. So it's not just them giving you something, you have something that
Right.
is of value to them as well.
Yeah. I totally agree. I totally
Right.
agree. So tell me, where are you guys today? So what year is this for you guys now that you've been around?
So we are entering our 9th year, and we are currently in about 25 cities. We just launched the entire state of Delaware. Yeah, we are in multiple cities in California. California is one of the most progressive food waste laws in the US, and so we're happy to have many partners there, and all over the East Coast as well.
Wow. Okay. Now with, I know that there's lots of, other food waste companies, and I know
Mm.
that yours, the way that it's set up with the app makes it, I think, innovative and a little different, right?
Yeah.
We have, I'm losing my train of thought, the one that Mayin Mafund has. Um,
Mm.
do you know that one? I forget the name of.
Yes, yeah. They don't mobilize a fleet of drivers. So what we do is we have our own drivers, over 40,000 registered on the app. It's the
Right.
largest, I would believe, like volunteer driver network in the world, like on
Wow.
demand. So all these 40,000 people will get these push notifications, alerting them of food rescues near them, and they take food from one location to the other, just like all of these other driver services that we avail of.
Wow, and I think that's so great. So how do you think that Replate was the one I was thinking of. Replate.
Yes. Yeah. So Replate actually has their own fleet of paid drivers, but they also use existing driver services that they in turn pay as well.
So how do you think that, this is your model will change and dictate the way that this area, this niche, this industry changes going forward?
So food waste is such a huge problem. If you can imagine, almost 1/3 to almost half our food supply going to waste, in certain foods more than others, such as fruits and vegetables. There's more than enough food to rescue for all of these models to be needed.
Mhm.
And food waste happens at every stage of the supply chain. So there's many instances that we can't ourselves rescue. For instance, we don't rescue from farms.
That
We
was my
rescue
next question. It's like you read my mind. I was going to ask you about the farmers because there's a huge amount of waste before it ever leaves the farm.
Exactly. So our solution is not for that. Our solution is more appropriate for urban areas that have a high density of grocery stores, restaurants, et cetera, but also a high density of people. And also needs to be somewhat drivable. So for instance, New York City would be a little bit challenging for our model. So there's room for all of these food waste companies and organizations to work. There's food waste companies that try to target the problem at the source, changing the way, putting coating in some fruits and vegetables so that we can slow down their ripening process,
Mm.
things like that. But and then households are our largest sources of food waste, actually. And there's no peer-to-peer exchange. If I have a harvest in my little tiny garden of zucchini and I want to give it away, there's no app I can go to. So there's
Right.
a lot of space for many, many different companies to work on this problem.
So what's new and what's next for you um, going forward in the next few years?
Well, there's again, as I said, in the US alone, 62 million tons of food go to waste. Our goal is to be in 100 cities by 2030. And so we are in about 25 or so right now. We have about 7 years to reach 100, and make sure that the app can be used in all of the major urban centers, if not, just the US and Canada, but, other countries as well.
And so for those folks listening and watching today, if they wanted to find out if you were available in their city, how might they go about doing that?
Yeah, follow us on social media at Food Rescue Hero or our website, foodrescuehero.org.
Wonderful. And if there's a city that is not involved and that city wanted to get involved, how might they propose that? How might they encourage their city to reach out to you?
Send us an email. We will work with you to make it happen. And that's how we've worked in all of the cities where Food Rescue Hero is.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah, so much for joining me. It was great to learn about your journey and what you're doing and how you're solving this problem.
Thanks so much, Justine.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.